It's been a little while since we last saw John Susan Pentop. He's been quite busy working at his company called Unicell, which sells unicorns to people that don't exist. It had been a hard day for John in that he hadn't made a single sale, although one could argue that he hadn't made a single sale in the history of the company's existence. To make matters worse, he had been chased home by what he could only surmise were zombies who wished to kill him and eat his brains. Life had recently been very unkind to John Susan Pentop. A few years ago, there had been an earthquake in Malaysia, and a deadly gas had been released from the Earth's crust, which had killed everyone on the Earth apart from John, who was impervious, possibly to the fact that he was over 90% android, or as he preferred to be called, John Susan Pentop. About this time of day, he would go into his dresser drawer and empty his pockets of the day's artifacts. What would he find today? Of course, he never left home without his DVD case, which didn't have a DVD in it, but rather holy water he would throw at zombies on his way home. His pornographic audio cassette, entirely in Greek, which he would often masturbate to at night. A train ticket given to him by someone called Voodoo Keith. Of course, the trains had stopped running due to the zombie holocaust, so he kept it purely for sentimental value. John's emergency food supply should he be captured by wolves. He believed that heat rub contained many nutrients and minerals. John was a bit slow. An old receipt for a penny farthing, which was strange because John had never bought a penny farthing, and indeed didn't even know what one was. An urn John had received as a gift from his future self during an episode of his life where he'd indulged in a spot of time travel. It contained his own ashes. Of course, that's another story. A shit one. A large glass of retarded goat's blood he kept in his top pocket, should he ever need to bribe a vampire for information. John's suit had been made for him on a different planet, another timeline, another world, by a blind dressmaker called Achtelert. John had asked the blind dressmaker to make him something magical with many powers and gifts, something that would dazzle women and get men jealous over his smartness and style and casuality. Unfortunately, whilst the suit had no discernible powers or strengths, it was indeed relatively comfortable. Unfortunately, just after finishing the suit for John, the blind dressmaker slipped on a dog shit, fell over a cliff and died. John was told by the strange old blind dressmaker that his shoes were, quite frankly, haunted, and to keep the spirits at bay, he would need to shout into them for at least 2 hours a day. And although that it's unfounded whether or not the shoes are in fact haunted or not, John didn't want to take any chances, and yes, every day, round about this time, he would take them off and scream into them for 2 hours exactly. Haunted or not, the shoes were definitely relatively comfortable, and John would wear them with glee as he ran away from mutants and zombies in the streets. John's house itself had been known to house a series of assassins, ninja, and indeed ninja assassins. Up until now, John had been able to thwart these deadly assailants using his own mix of verbal martial arts, which included a language of John's own devising, being shouted, or delivered as he liked to put it, at an extremely high volume, and sometimes for up to days at a time. He would keep this up until the deadly assailants eventually fucked off, at which point he would laugh and clap and celebrate his victory. Of course, sometimes this had come down to a physical confrontation when they couldn't be dissuaded by his shouting methods, and he had to flap his arms until he blacked out, and they left him alone because they got bored. And so John crept around his house gingerly until he was certain that it was free of assassins. Some of the most deadly battles had taken place in John's bedroom. There he had fought Quag, the ruler of Quados, and his army of sexy robots, Dynamite Dudley and his dwarven sidekick Short Fuse, and perhaps his most dangerous and drawn-out battle, one that nearly finished him off, and he dared not talk about even now, years later, was of course that epic battle between John Susan Pentop and Peter and his fists. Is anyone here? Round about now, John would normally get ready for his bath, but first of all, he had to do what he assumed that most other people had done before the zombie apocalypse. He would check his bedsheets for ghosts. Many was the time he had felt transient safety in his bedroom, and had climbed into bed next to his small teddy bear Peter, kissed his teddy bear Peter goodnight, and promptly been possessed by demons. He had, of course, up until now, been able to fend them off and separate the spirits from his own soul, purely by luck, as he was versed heavily in the arts of exorcism. Of course, he couldn't always rely on this, as he was quite forgetful, and he correctly assumed that should he forget the exorcism ritual once he had been possessed, he would be dragged down to Hades and tortured forever by the devil and Beelzebub by having increasingly sharp things put up his bum. John gingerly descended his stairs in a state of glee due to not having any run-ins with his foes. Food had become understandably scarce after the zombie holocaust. Luckily, John had the ability to vividly hallucinate food so intensely that it would actually become physical and he could consume it. Although tonight, John intended on doing some home cooking. Tonight, he would dine on finely chopped peanuts bathed in mustard from a sachet he kept hidden safely in his hair. John would often think of a cheery little song while he chopped food.
Spring of solitude, summer of sadness, autumn of agony, winter of disinclination, Monday of mundanity, Tuesday of testicular inflammation, Wednesday of woe, Thursday of thoughts of suicide, Friday of flippant comments made during a prayer, Saturday of spinal fluid infections, Sunday of absolute shit. If you were a car, you wouldn't start. 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 If you were a car, you wouldn't start.
Although to some people the song may seem frightening and occasionally ill-informed, it didn't reflect John's true mindset, which was one of happiness, peace, and total insanity. The absurdity of John's life never once entered into his own frame of mind. He thought he was living out a predetermined route, and as such he had nothing to fear. At this point, what John would normally do is stand back from his oven and wave a sharp knife at it until the food had cooked properly. As John ate his food happily in the privacy of his own kitchen, amidst millions of zombies consuming each other and indeed anything they could find outside, he often wondered if there was something more he could be doing with his life. Should he have tried harder at school? Should he have maybe gone to college instead of trying to devise a language devised entirely out of circles? There were many things he should have done, could have done, would have done. He often didn't think of them. When we say often, constantly, and yet never. Not once did he ever think of something he should have, could have, would have, or never done. Perhaps this was intrinsic to his happiness, his intense solitude, and yet he was amongst company in his own mind all of the time, because of his own many certain special qualities. It was around this time of day that John would head back into his living room, sit on his couch, and have a good old-fashioned hallucination. So real were John's hallucinations that he would be driven to throw himself off his couch, bang his head, stand up, and run away from them as quickly as he could, almost a blur of speed as he runs into the bathroom, where he would run in, panic, slam the door behind him, and breathe heavily for a few seconds whilst trying not to shit his pants. After this escapade, which was entirely self-inflicted due to John's supposed love of hallucinations, he would then run a nice bath for himself. But of course, in true John Susan Pentop fashion, he would not only run the bath and then go and do something before he got in, no, he would stand by it and wait the full 4 hours until the water had filled up. By then, of course, it would be cold. Almost as cold as his strange, twisted, dead heart. Of course, like most other people out there before the zombie apocalypse, John liked nothing more than a good, hard, scented candle for his bath. He would breathe in its aromas and place it gingerly above the centre of the bath and watch it disappear into the depth because he didn't quite grasp how to use them properly. Hey-ho, thought John as he stood up, walked over to the other side of his bathroom, took off his shirt and boxers, and eventually got his arse out. Thought John, a lovely, soothing bath. After the bath, John would emerge from the bathroom a victorious man. He'd succeeded, he'd done it, he was clean. Admittedly, the bath water had been recycled many times and was technically by this time, if not urine, then definitely sewage. But this didn't perturb John one bit. He would breathe heavily and toke on his pipe as he walked through his house. He loved his house, it was his one sanctuary away from his own insanity. He'd turn off the lights lovingly, one by one. Turning around, breathing in deeply in every room, he would eventually turn off all the lights and ascend his staircase and walk up to his room. He loved it, he loved his life. Tomorrow will be another day at the office at Unicell trying to sell unicorns to those people that don't exist. But tomorrow could be that big day, that big sale, thought John, and I could get a promotion. Even though John didn't realize he was calling people on phone lines that had been disconnected long ago, possibly due to the zombie holocaust. Again, this didn't bother John one iota. As he trudged up his staircase, still keeping his eye out for those assassins, you never know, they might pop out, those pesky buggers, and he would approach his door, sigh, take a deep breath, and step inside his love sanctuary, where his pipe would promptly disappear. His old pipe given him by his grandfather on his deathbed, as he muttered those famous last words, "Who are you?" No, luckily it had simply teleported to Peter, his teddy bear. "Oh, Peter, you little tinker," thought John Susan Pentop as he tucked up into bed and fell in love with his little bear all over again. Falling asleep in bed with a pipe is probably a fire hazard, thought John. Fuck it.
Good night, Peter!